Welcome to the live stream at First Unitarian Wilmington podcast. Here we will share some sermons, talks, interviews, or conversations we call life journeys, and also occasionally music. I'm Reverend Larry Piers, minister at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. If you enjoy what we are offering, please share it with a friend. Our purpose is to spark conversations and to share what we value as a Unitarian Universalist congregation with a wider community. To find out more about us, please visit our website, firstuuwilm.org. And now, welcome to this episode of Livestream at First Unitarian. So, Mike, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. As you know, this series is called Life Journeys, and I'm just an innately curious person. I'm curious about people's lives, the wisdom they've gained along the way, any insights that I might actually gain from their wisdom, and just how they arrived at who they are and where they are in their life. So I'm going to ask you some questions. Let this be kind of a conversation, and you could even ask me questions if you want.
Yeah.
I might not answer all your questions, but you can ask me questions. So tell me first about your upbringing, where you grew up, and what it was like growing up when you did. And I'm also curious if part of that you could also indicate if there was any religious background in your family.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in St. Louis with a really big family, an extended family. And then when I was in kindergarten, moved to Houston, Texas. My dad did that for work. So that actually took us away from our extended family. So it was just our nuclear family. I was one of five. I had an older brother, an older sister, and two younger sisters. And we were kind of a rowdy Catholic family. Very loving, but also fairly dysfunctional, as many families are, I suppose. So it was a very crowded house. You know, we didn't have money for a lot of bedrooms, and the typical chaos of having 7 people under one roof. And so we were Catholic, or I should say I was Catholic. My parents had varying degrees of depth in their faith and participation in their faith of Catholicism. Very much so when I was younger. And then they kind of faded as I became a preteen and early teen, only to really return back to the church in my mid to late teens once there was a couple close family members that had died. Yeah. My parents really kind of struggled to find some more meaning, and really desired a stronger sense of religion in their life. So I always had a strong pull to religion. I was an altar boy for a few years, but found it to be actually kind of boring, so didn't continue with that. But I did actually like being in church for the most part, and always had a strong sense of connection to God, or something that felt like God anyway.
I noticed you kind of grasped with your hand, as you said, I felt a kind of connection. So if you could tell me what it was you were grasping as you were thinking about that memory, that connection, what were some of the qualities or characteristics of that experience for you?
I think as much as a young child can put together in their head a really deeper experience of the mystery of God, kind of the mystery of life. I remember as a fairly young, probably elementary school kid, thinking if I could just really concentrate really hard, I could connect with some kind of mystery, some kind of religious mystery. And then I have this memory in 5th grade, there was a time period when I would go to church. And for me, when you would go through communion and take the host, and then people would often go back to the pew and sit and pray for a few minutes in silence, I would have there was a period of time for a few months. Sometimes I would have these kind of almost religious experiences, of some kind of deep mystery after taking the host and things like that. So there was always this really strong connection for religion for me. But as I got into my teen years, the kind of the right and wrong, sin, not sin, you have a mortal sin, you go to hell, you're there forever, just didn't make sense with the way I put together reality.
So there was a disconnect then.
Yeah, absolutely.
And where did that come from in you, that you had another way of looking at some of the things that you had been taught? Where do you suppose that arose in you?
Yeah,
that you even were able to look at it a little more critically or differently. Any thoughts about that?
That's a great question. I don't know the exact way that I cognitively put it together, that it didn't make sense to me. You have so many people on earth that are born into really dysfunctional situations, or have really horrific things that happen to them, or whatever, and we have just such a small, finite amount of time on earth, and then to be judged and sentenced to infinity based upon some small amount of decades of years, to me just didn't make any sense. If there was a higher power, that didn't seem to make a lot of sense, that the higher power would make that the rule for our souls.
Yeah. So it almost seems like there was a value of fairness there. Did it not seem fair? And maybe that's another way to say it didn't feel right. But
yeah, I think saying that it didn't feel right, and many of the kind of the religious rules to me seemed very arbitrary. I knew there's some degree of some of the decisions and rules that were made in the church and past years, and still remnants of it now, are based upon power and politics and things like that. And that did not, to me, really seem to jive with my experience of something that is beautiful and mysterious with regards to religion.
Yeah. Okay. So the mysterious seems to be a theme here, in the sense of your experience of, after receiving the host, sitting there and just being in quiet, being in a kind of a stillness, we might say a more contemplative kind of place, not needing to pray so much as to be in that experience. So it seems like something that you return to, and it was something that is just part of who you are, a sense of appreciating mystery and the mysterious.
Yeah, I
Am
think
I
so.
putting words in your mouth?
No,
or is that
no,
what
I think that's actually a good way to describe it. I think at that time, too, I liked spending a lot of time outdoors. We did a lot of camping as family. And then once I became old enough to do it on my own, in my latter teens, friends, we would go out camping and things like that. And I found a real connection in nature, a sense of something deeper, that didn't operate on many of the same kind of rules that were taught, I felt like, in much of kind of more organized religion.
Yeah. So let's draw a distinction here between what you were taught and what you found yourself gravitating to in this teen area.
Yeah.
And I would love to contextualize it a little bit for people who are only listening and can't see maybe how old you are or whatever. Like, what time period are we talking about? First of all, in this time period.
So I was born in 1969. So I will turn 55 in about a week.
Okay.
And so this time period was probably anywhere, my elementary age was probably in the early 80s to latter 80s in my teen years.
And what was happening in the world then that you were aware of and that might have impacted you? Anything?
I feel like that time period, there were, some more minor conflicts in the world, but I don't know, or at least I don't have memory of significant conflicts like more so today. There wasn't the same kind of Middle East thing, and that wasn't until really the 90s. Of course, there was nothing like similar to the pandemic. So there were smaller conflicts around the world. There was the recession, and I think it was the earlier 80s, but didn't really affect me.
Okay.
So there wasn't a lot of world events per se that were of the magnitude I feel like that we've experienced in the last decade to 2 decades.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So the lesson from your early life is what?
I think the lesson from my earlier life is that my impression of our life was, and maybe if you want to put it through the lens of religion, was something that didn't entirely correlate with a lot of the more black and white ways that many more organized religions teach us.
So you started expanding the monochrome way of looking at
absolutely.
things and seeing more nuances, and it sounds like actually wanting more mystery and more depth and being comfortable with being open with that rather than having it rigid and okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I have placed some stones on the table here where we're talking, and I'm going to let those represent stepping stones in your life, and you've given us a sense of what the early stepping stones are, but now you have a choice to tell us what are some of the other stepping stones that are meaningful for you in terms of who you've become. And you can talk about 2 or 3 or 4. We got all afternoon. You can talk forever. But pick the ones that you feel are like the highlights that were turning points for you.
Okay.
That have given shape and form to your life.
Sure. And now I can grab a stone.
Okay, great.
So people, I guess for those that don't know me, I am a physician, and I do this because it's one of the things that seemed to make sense. One way that I felt like I'd be fulfilled both cognitively and being able to do something that seems to me more meaningful in the world.
Yeah.
That was actually something that one of the things I wanted to do ever since I was a young child.
Yeah.
I have this great story that my mom tells me that when I was just before my 4th birthday, I told her I wanted to be an operator. And so she took it to be someone that works on the phone, and she says, "Well, why would you want to work on the phone?" I was like, "No, Mom, I want to operate on people." So this was actually one of the themes.
Yeah.
About that time, I felt like I wanted to either be an operator or a doctor, an artist or a farmer. Those are the 3 things 4-year-old me wanted to do.
Yeah.
So having medicine as something I was always interested in, and then also having the influence of my mother being a nurse, I started taking EMS classes in a community college just after high school. But then my family, we really didn't have very much money. So in investigating, trying to figure out how I was going to pay for college, I ended up joining the Army.
Okay.
And was a medic in the Army.
Interesting.
So, it was hard, but I feel like that was certainly a formative experience.
There were several syllables in that word formative when you said it. So I'm going to want to appreciate that there was a lot in that. So whatever you want to say about it, what helped formed or shaped you from that experience?
One of the things I feel like shaped me or informed me was physically and even emotionally or mentally, it was challenging in ways that I had not experienced before. I felt like prior to that, before I went into the Army, I was, probably drinking and partying a little too much. I wasn't too focused, or as much focused as I needed to be on school to actually be able to go to med school and things like that. And it really, and maybe I never fully 100% engaged myself in the pursuit of a goal and doing things. I always felt like maybe I'd give 60, 70, 75% or something.
Yeah.
And so my time in the Army, being pushed, especially like basic training and other training, really taught me how much I could do. Physically, during basic training, I realized that if you really, really focus your mind on something, you can physically do it. Obviously, there's the injury aspect and things like that, but, as long as your body's actually working, you can push yourself to do things. As long as you have the mental desire to do so, you can go way beyond what you ever thought you could do.
And it was an actual experience for you, not just a concept. So
absolutely,
you really got that as a lived knowledge, lived wisdom through experience, and seeing what you could do to discipline your body and engage your will towards a direction, towards an aim.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then when I was in medic school, I very early on decided I was going to do really well, and then decided my goal was going to be the valedictorian of the class.
Ah. What was it that? Why did that appeal to you?
Partly ego.
Okay, well, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in more so, I felt like this was a turning point in my life where it was time to actually kind of see what I'm capable of, see what I can do, commit to it and bring about, the energy in my life to pursuing my goals and fulfilling my goals.
Yeah. I'm just appreciating, as you talk about this, how, there was a period where you were testing out and things were more casual and unfocused, and then you really did focus in. But then you gave yourself the added a goal of being valedictorian, which meant that you had to really focus and achieve some specific things in order to arrive at that in terms of maybe grade point average and all of those things.
Right.
So where did that drive come from in you?
I'd always done well in school. If I tried.
Yeah.
School was never particularly difficult for me. And so therefore I think I got used to, maybe only doing 50%. And for once I wanted to give it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a measurable goal, something I could work towards, something I had to exhibit the discipline to do.
So that's a period of accomplishment and recognizing that you could set your mind on something, you could focus, you could utilize your will to move in a certain direction. Is there another stepping stone that comes along the way? And you can even pick up another stone if you want to focus on that?
So once I got out of the Army, I started an undergrad. And my undergrad was at biology, and it was to go into medicine. So in some ways it was a stepping stone, but also in some ways maybe it was a meandering path. I did end up in a longer-term relationship with a woman, and the relationship did end up being fairly dysfunctional. So much so that at the time of graduation, I had already been through one relationship that ended up being kind of a common law marriage that dissolved because of a lot of dysfunction, and then ended up in another relationship, engaged, and that dissolved as well. So at the time of finishing undergrad, I felt like emotionally I was in a place that I probably wasn't healthy enough to have the energy and focus to do medical school.
And how old would you have been around that time?
That time I was probably latter 20s.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I finished right around 29 or 30. And, looking back, it wasn't just, kind of procrastination or anything. I think I actually had a fairly honest evaluation of where I was mentally and emotionally that probably wasn't the right time for it. And I ended up applying to a program called Teach for America and becoming a 7th grade science teacher and moved to Phoenix.
Interesting. So a real turn of events. But you gained lessons anyway through that experience, it seems. That
I did.
Again, you're utilizing your will and your direction, but you're focusing it in another way. That's different than the operator idea that you had as a 4-year-old.
Right.
Okay, so tell us about that time.
Well, I think some of the Well, that time was actually really interesting for me and opened my eyes to life in a different way. I worked in an area that was very socioeconomically depressed.
Okay.
There was a lot of gang activity in my neighborhood. There was a lot of crime, and it was really kind of almost a poverty-level neighborhood that I worked in. For those that aren't are aware, Teach for America is a program that takes graduates, mostly non-education graduates, and puts them through a very kind of crash course in education, and then places them in places across the country that are very high needs and often socioeconomically depressed. And so you purposely go into these areas to try to, help these children close the achievement gap as compared to their more affluent peers.
Yeah. So what came to you through that experience? What wisdom or insight or?
Yeah. I gained a better understanding of poverty. And, I think a lot of times in our society, people have this idea that if you just try hard enough, then you can succeed. And they don't understand what generational poverty does for people and to people. And it's I began to understand when you have a child who has multiple family members in jail, who've had family members who have been, killed, who has no one in their family that has graduated high school college, and most of those who've not even graduated high school. The idea of going to college and doing something else just seems completely foreign to them. Something that doesn't even seem like a possibility.
So it almost seems like that was a time where some of the social mythology that we have of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, the dream of America or whatever, got somewhat wrinkled as you began to actually see the actual experience of generational poverty and the impact that not everyone is starting out at the same place.
That's
and
right.
That can impact people from generation to another. Not everyone gains that experience, but you put yourself right in the middle of it.
I feel like there's been several parts of my life or several points in my life where there was some ignorance in my decisions of not really understanding what I was getting myself into. In some ways made things hard, but also was a fortunate mistake.
And I loved how you smiled when you said there was some ignorance on my part. But, the smile, what's the smile about?
Well, I guess, that's a great question. The smile, I guess looking back at my own naive self, probably not that different than my naive self now, but I guess maybe we make these decisions of different things in our lives, and we often don't have the full picture and can't have the full picture of what these decisions make or mean to us. And so I think kind of just not finding that amusing in a demeaning way, but just amusing of like what it's like to be human and make these decisions and find out that there was way more involved than you ever could imagine.
And I think it's very helpful for us to acknowledge and to state that no matter how rational or well thought out or deliberative we think we are, sometimes we do act out of ignorance, and sometimes a wisdom arrives that would have not otherwise arrived because we've taken a risk, and we've stepped into the unknown, but still something is gained from that, which is very different from the person who doesn't even take the first step because they're afraid of that ignorance or what is unknown, I might say. All right, so is there another stepping stone you want to tell us about? This is getting really interesting.
So, being a new and relatively untrained teacher in a very disadvantaged area was exceptionally difficult. Teach for America even has kind of almost a chart of the trajectory of someone. And at Christmas time, everyone's in, quote, survival mode. Which is very true. You really are in kind of emotional survival mode. You're just going through the motions and doing what you can to survive on a day-to-day basis. So I did get better. I had some really good mentors that taught me how to be a pretty decent teacher, but then I also realized that that wasn't my life's work. Mm-hmm. As much as I love being with the kids and I love seeing the light come on when they got something, that's not really what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. If I was going to teach, I wanted to teach on the college level or something that felt like a little bit more cognitively challenging for me.
Yeah.
So then I was kind of in a spot of, well, what's next?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wasn't really sure. And I had been introduced to meditation some years before that and had practiced meditation periodically, for probably about a decade before this particular time period. Never anything really disciplined, just periodically. And then immediately before I went to Phoenix to teach, I had a roommate that serendipitously was a religions major. And he was at a crisis point in his life and basically sold all of his belongings, everything that could fit in a car, and he had this romantic idea he would just live in his car and travel and write for the next few years and discover life. And in that process...
Aren't there books written about people like that?
I think there's one called Into the Wild.
Right. All right. So he really wanted to try it out, not just read about it. Okay.
And so I thought it was admirable and also kind of scary, but I, in a way, I guess, benefited by him leaving me some books. He knew I had an interest in meditation, and he left me a couple of Zen books that are part of his curriculum.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so reading those, it really kind of started to light a fire in myself that there was something that had started to speak to the unanswered curiosity and mystery that the religious experiences I had years before didn't fully answer, and only left me wanting more. So fast forward to, I just finished my second year of teaching and knew I wasn't going to continue, but I wasn't really sure what was next, but I had a good idea that this would probably be a good time to become more involved in my spirituality.
Yeah.
And so I took a major leap of faith, and I decided that I was going to quit teaching. I wasn't sure what was next, but I was going to dedicate my life to my meditation practice.
Yeah. So when you said dedicate your life, it kind of had a different tone than that self that you were when you were going into the military.
Yeah.
That seemed very willful and determined, but dedication has a different kind of feel to it. So give me some of the sense of what dedication, how did the dedication feel in you, and what was it? Because it doesn't feel as willful, it feels there's something else. So fill me in. I told you I was curious.
Oh, so. Yeah, it's great. And I'll grab another stone.
Okay.
I like what you say there about dedication, because I think that's really true. Dedication seems like a intent to engage in something versus a specific goal. Yeah. A reorientation of yourself towards something without really knowing what that means. We can dedicate ourselves to a job, but we don't really know what that means. Yeah. We can dedicate ourselves to our relationship, but God knows on a day-to-day basis what that's going to bring you. And for me, dedicating myself to a meditation practice and a spiritual practice was a huge unknown. Yeah. And I didn't really know what that was going to mean or bring, but I knew it was something that I would regret if I didn't do.
It felt something that you almost had to do in a sense.
Exactly.
Like that's where you had arrived.
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't come with a valedictorian status as in the earlier.
Yeah.
So this is coming from a different motivation with you, but it has a whole different mode and mood to it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. It all came about towards the end of my, not came about, but it was solidified, I suppose, towards the end of my second year of teaching in the early spring. I really was kind of playing with it. I was kind of scared to make that leap. And I had a dream. And kind of the summary take-home point of that dream was I was walking along, feeling rather dejected inside the dream, and I was walking along an old stone wall, and sitting on the end of the wall was an Asian spiritual teacher-looking person sitting cross-legged, and he just very calmly said hello to me, and I said hello to him, and he just asked, "Well, what are you waiting for?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He was like, "Well, what are you waiting for?" And I was like, "I don't know what you mean." He's like, "Well, I think you do know what I mean." And I was like, "My spiritual practice." He's like, "Exactly." He said, "You can either do this now, or you can do this later, or you cannot do it and then regret it."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I had this image as you said that, because I think in a lot of times in our lives, we press the snooze button on something, and we might not be aware that we've done it, but we press the snooze button. But there is a moment of awareness there where you realized you could hit the snooze button, or you could enter into that path. Like now was the moment.
Yeah.
And the dream seemed to be conveying that to you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wow.
Yeah. And it was one of those dreams when you wake up from it, and you're just on fire.
Yeah.
You know, I knew at that point there was no saying no.
Yeah.
You know, that this is something I had to do.
So it was a real gift, really.
It really
The
was,
trip
yeah.
The dream was a real gift.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
Yeah, you know,
This could be a Netflix series, actually. But we'll try to keep it contained.
I had been traveling from Phoenix to Flagstaff. To stay at a hostel up there during my time as a teacher, and bumped into a meditation group. And I found a little 3x5 note card on a community board at a local natural food store. This is, meditation, come here on Sundays. So I did that a couple times and got an email about an upcoming retreat that summer. And it would have been the summer after I finished teaching.
Yeah.
And so I tried to get into that retreat, but was unable to because it was full. But the same Zen Center had another retreat like a week and a half, 2 weeks later. I didn't know anything about this teacher. And so I was like, well, why not? And so I ended up doing a backpacking trip in the mountains north of Santa Fe for a week, and then went to this Zen meditation retreat for about 5 days and met my teacher. Yeah. And I think it's safe to say that the retreat changed my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was the change that you noticed, or how did the change unfold in you? When were you aware of that change happening?
Yeah. The mystery I had explained earlier, this desire to feel that something deeper in our human lives, that sense of longing for there's got to be more to it than this that I started experiencing as a child.
Yeah.
Wasn't answered per se. I don't know that there's an answer to that comes in words. But the experience of coming face to face with something that's really vast and beautiful, out of which the world comes, with something that was like, okay, this is it. This is something that I've been looking for.
Yeah, like there was a longing in you, and somehow, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just testing this out.
Yeah.
So that longing that you knew really early in your life, you followed it, and it then, in that moment, you began to realize it. It was like a longing, but it was a fulfillment in that longing.
Yeah.
Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
Okay. All right, what's next?
Okay.
Is there another stepping stone or two that you'd like to talk
is.
about? Okay.
Yeah, so I worked in coffee shops. I did odd jobs. Anything I could do just to keep a roof on my head, food in my stomach, and have money to go on retreats and practice meditation and practice in meditation, and did that for a few years until at the urging of my teachers that it's time to go back into life. that I did the, quote, I'm making air quotes, Dharma bum thing for, 2 or 3 years, that it was time to go back into my life.
Yeah. Nice.
So that was the next step of trying to figure out if it was going to be psychology or if it was going to be medicine. I had interest in both.
Yeah, interesting. So now I feel like the soundtrack is changing a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened?
I had kind of thought maybe it was going to be psychology, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do the PhD route, if I was going to do a master's program, or what it was, and then. I had actually taken some psychology classes at the local community college during the night and was working during the day. And I had a series of dreams again. Yeah. I remember it was a Wednesday night, and I had a dream that I was accepted to medical school. And when I woke up, it was that sense again of just, wow. That was... Sometimes dreams, when I feel like they give you messages in life, they feel different than an average dream. And so I was like, okay, but I'm probably going to do psychology. I think that's what I'm going to do. And then literally a week later on Wednesday, I had a dream that I was in medical school and doing medical school. And again, I woke up and I was like, okay, but I'm going to do psychology. And that med school, that seems really long and hard, and residency, it's a lot of money, and so a week later on Wednesday, I had a dream that I graduated from medical school. And it was, again, the same really, really important feeling dream when I woke up. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing psychology. I'm doing medical school.
Lovely. I just want to appreciate the dream as gifts. The dreams were gifts to you. But I also want to appreciate the dialogue that you were willing to have with the dream. Like there's something in you that's saying medical school, and there's another that, no, I'm going to do psychology. So letting the dialogue happen and unfold as it did, I think is wonderful to kind of recognize that there was a push-pull time, but at some point you kind of said this is the right path I'm going to take.
Yeah, it's kind of in some ways in life when you have ideas of what you're going to do, and then there's life's idea of what you're going to do.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Life's idea of what you're going to do.
Or life's, I don't want to say plan because it sounds like it's a predestined type thing.
Yeah, but I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you have to be open to life's idea. Is what I'm hearing in what you just said. Yeah. Because we could battle many years of our life between, no, I'm going to do this, but life could keep knocking at the door or pulling at our heart until the point where you surrender and say, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. Okay. So what's next?
Within a couple months, I had pretty much given away all my stuff, because I didn't have any money to move anything back to Texas, and moved back to Texas. Took a couple of years to kind of get my affairs in order, my financial affairs in order. Oh, there you go.
So you heard a call.
Yes, just like that. So packed up all my stuff and moved back to Texas. There was a financial advantage for me since I was a veteran to do medical school in Texas, and my family was still there. Yeah, it'd be good to be around my family. So it took a couple years to study for the entrance exam, to get my financial affairs in order and things like that, and finally got accepted to medical school in Dallas and started medical school right before I turned 40.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Now we have another stepping stone.
Yeah, another stepping stone. So, it was really hard, but really rewarding. It was, again, kind of as the spiritual sense of finding a Zen Buddhist practice. This sense, our medical school fulfilled that sense of the cognitive challenge, the challenge for working to help others. Something that felt very meaningful.
Yeah. No. Well. And that's a long journey. How many years is that?
Well, medical school's 4, and then you have your residency. Right. Mine was 5. Usual is 3, but I did a combined, I did a dual specialty of emergency medicine and internal medicine, which didn't turn out to be, which is 5 years.
Yeah, interesting.
And I finished that almost 6 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what feels right to talk about next in terms of a stepping stone that might bring you up to the present or whatever?
You know, in the time involvement and the stress and everything of medical school, and especially residency, you know, you probably average some weeks 80 hours a week at least. A lot of my spiritual practice kind of became a little fallow. Never went away, but certainly was not as engaged. And there was a time period of taking stock and looking at, you know, now that I'm in my 50s, this was a few years ago, what do I want the last quarter-ish of my life to look like? You know, what do I want to do purposefully? You know, and trying to honor, you know, life itself in that I don't always know exactly what's best for me, maybe. And so I decided to become more engaged in my practice again. And I had kind of come to this conclusion a couple of times, and each time I came to the conclusion, I felt like it had a little bit more gravity to it, you know. And through my wife's encouragement or request, she wanted us to be involved in more of a spiritual community, you know. She grew up Methodist, and I had been to some services with her, and it didn't feel that much different for me personally than the kind of a Catholic Mass. So she's like, well, there's a Unitarian church real close to our house. We could check that out. And we just happened actually to be in Spain. And she's like, I wonder if they have anything online to look at. So it was, of course, First UU.
Okay, of Wilmington?
Yeah, of Wilmington here. And we were sitting in our little apartment next to an old cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. And we watched a sermon that you gave, Larry. And I was like, wow. That guy's great.
Let's not edit that part out. Okay. Continue, Mike.
And we laugh, but you know that really was my sentiment. That this is you know, if this is exemplary of what it's like there, this is something where I think I could probably feel comfortable coming and developing a community.
So it felt like a place for further exploration and developing something, rather than having to fit into something. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. What do you think the lure was in watching the sermon or the service? What was the lure for you?
Yeah, there was a bit of understanding at that point, or learning that, you know, Unitarianism isn't a prescribed path per se. That they welcome a wider range of spiritual exploration and spiritual practice. There was hearing your sermon that actually brought in some elements of things that I've heard with talks in some Eastern spiritual traditions, you know, and a sense of inviting people to explore spirituality from within a little bit, and presenting some ideas, but not telling people, you know, this is right, this is wrong type of thing. Yeah. Something that felt comfortable to me, and a way of speaking and a way of giving a sermon that I had become accustomed to through other religious teachers.
Yeah. So what have you actually experienced here? That was the lure.
Yeah.
And what is it that you're experiencing while you're here?
Yeah. I think it's a wonderful community. You know, it's great to come on Sundays. It's great to come to other events and see people. And, you know, people are very welcoming and very friendly and very open. And it's nice to look around and see people that I know. And even if I'm not going to their house and hanging out with them all the time, people that I consider friends and being part of the community. It's also been a place for me to help create a meditation group as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And that group is Wednesdays at 7 now, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And formally we call it the Heart Mind Meditation Fellowship.
Nice.
Yeah. And that was at the same time of wanting to be part of a spiritual community. That was kind of in the natural progression of wanting to have a more engaged and more dedicated spiritual practice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're having to teach, it also keeps you accountable as well. I'll say that to myself as well. Sometimes preaching, I have to hold myself accountable. I hope I'm not projecting that on you. Oh, goodness. So, why don't you conclude this conversation by just reflecting on what you have gained from this conversation?
Yeah.
What is it that you've learned, or what's the feeling or the insight that kind of lingers a little bit with you before we end the conversation? What's the...
I think it reminds me of the importance of having community. Be it what we would traditionally call a sangha with a Buddhist practice, or a Unitarian congregation, thing like that. Being part of a community to have a spiritual practice, it's I think it's essential. It's important that we have each other. We have the support of other people, and the companionship of other people. I think through the years, really having an understanding of just the uncertainty of life and what things bring you, and try not to throw too many temper tantrums when it brings things unexpected or unwanted, because it's not going to change that. It only makes it more difficult.
Yeah. And it seems like you've been able to dialogue with those moments as they've arisen in your life. And they've propelled you, nudged you, or moved you in some other direction that then unfolded something else.
I think I've been really lucky. I've had many good mentors in my life. Even if it's like on the business side, teaching how to be a better manager, which translates into your own life and working with people. Many really outstanding spiritual mentors. Even the people I've read that have really impacted the way I see and experience the world.
Well, in my experience, this has been a gift to me as well. I've appreciated getting to know you a little bit more, and also the sort of the journey that you have taken. So thank you so much for doing this.
It's been a pleasure.
Great.